Somewhere in the deep past, more than one kind of human walked the earth at once. Not different cultures, different species, distinct lineages, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. Researchers believe at least 5 or 6 hominin species may have coexisted. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, the small-bodied Homo floresiensis on Flores, possibly Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, possibly others still unfound. Today there's one. Just us. So what happened to the rest? Let's start with the version that dominates popular imagination, since it deserves honest evaluation. Did modern humans kill the Neanderthals? Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger. They made sophisticated tools requiring real planning, cared for their injured. Skeletons show healed wounds needing weeks or months of dependent care, buried their dead, and some contested evidence suggests decoration or rudimentary art. These were not simple creatures overrun by an obviously superior invader. They were people, by any reasonable definition. And roughly 40,000 years ago, shortly after modern humans arrived in Europe in real numbers, they vanished. That correlation repeats across their entire habitation range. It's not subtle. But correlation isn't causation, and paleoanthropology has a long history of confident conclusions later overturned. So what does the actual evidence say? Direct violence is the most dramatic explanation, essentially genocide over thousands of years. But the evidence is thin. Some Neanderthal remains show trauma some researchers attribute to violence, but distinguishing that from Neanderthal on Neanderthal conflict, accidents, or geological damage is genuinely difficult. There's no smoking gun for systematic large-scale violence, though that absence proves nothing either way. Violence spread across an entire continent over thousands of years wouldn't necessarily leave concentrated evidence anywhere specific. What we do have is proof of something else entirely, and this is where the story gets far more complicated. Subscribe, because what this next piece of evidence actually implies is stranger than direct violence ever could be. Neanderthal DNA is in your genome right now. Not a trace detectable only with sophisticated equipment, but a real, measurable percentage. Roughly 1 to 4% of the genome of every modern human with ancestry outside sub-Saharan Africa. Slightly higher in parts of East Asia and Oceania. Modern humans and Neanderthals interbred repeatedly, at multiple locations, across thousands of years, and that lineage survived down to you. Groups engaged in systematic mutual extermination don't typically also produce viable offspring together. At minimum, the relationship included real periods of proximity that weren't uniformly hostile. But the genetic contribution is also relatively small, coming from a limited number of interbreeding events rather than continuous large-scale mixing, more consistent with occasional contact between mostly separate populations than full integration. Direct violence is only one part of a bigger story. Disease may have been the most significant factor, and it gets the least attention. Modern humans arriving from Africa carried pathogens they'd built resistance to over thousands of years. Neanderthals, isolated from those environments, had none. The catastrophic mortality European contact caused among indigenous populations in the Americas gives a documented analog for exactly this dynamic. A modern human didn't need a weapon to carry death, and unlike violence, disease leaves no trace in a fossil. Climate mattered too. Neanderthal disappearance, roughly 40,000 to 28,000 years ago, overlapped with real climate instability in Europe, meaning the population was likely already stressed before modern humans arrived in force. And competition for resources requires no hostile intent at all. Two species sharing an ecological niche compete by default. If you want the deeper version of everything in this series, I've put together a full course on ancient survival, link in the description. Modern humans appear to have had real competitive advantages. Long-distance trade evidence, shells and pigments moving huge distances, points to social networks considerably larger and longer range than Neanderthal sites show, meaning better resource information and more support during lean periods. Modern humans also seem to have had more advanced projectile technology, spear throwers, and eventually bows, allowing hunting at a distance with less risk than the close-range techniques Neanderthal anatomy appears built for. More efficient hunting meant sustaining higher population density in the same landscape, gradually pushing Neanderthal groups into marginal territory until those populations became too small to survive. No violence required, just competitive exclusion, running quietly for thousands of years. The Denisovans are even stranger and harder to pin down. They were discovered not from a skeleton but a single finger bone and tooth in Siberia's Denisova cave in the early 2000s, and almost everything we know comes from DNA rather than fossils. Denisovan DNA shows up across Asia and Oceania, highest in Aboriginal Australian, Papua New Guinean, and Southeast Asian populations, and some inherited variants were genuinely beneficial. The high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations traces back to Denisovan origin. Denisovans also interbred with Neanderthals themselves, meaning both extinct lineages were in direct contact. The real picture isn't a clean family tree, but a tangled web of contact and gene flow across species, over hundreds of thousands of years. What happened to the Denisovans is even harder to answer, since fossil evidence is almost non-existent. Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, tells a different story. It survived on the Indonesian island of Flores until roughly 50,000 years ago, right when modern humans reached the region. But island dynamics differ from continental ones. Smaller, isolated populations are more vulnerable to both disease and resource competition, and whatever happened may have happened faster than on a continent. Flores also had volcanic activity, and a large eruption alone could have devastated a small island population independent of anything modern humans did. As with all of this, we don't know for certain. The timing implicates modern humans. The mechanism doesn't. There's a piece of this rarely discussed: what interbreeding actually meant socially, on the ground. Neanderthal DNA surviving in us means somewhere a mixed ancestry child was born, raised, and eventually had children of their own. Whether that first encounter was consensual, violent, or shaped by years of neighboring coexistence, the genes can't tell us. They record that reproduction happened, nothing about its circumstances. Some of what modern humans absorbed from Neanderthals, immune function and metabolic variants among them, appears to have been genuinely useful. The replacement wasn't clean. So did modern humans kill the other human species? Probably yes, in some ways, some places, sometimes, but rarely through anything resembling deliberate, organized extermination. It looks more diffuse. Disease unknowingly carried. Competition won through better technology and networks. Interbreeding that left genetic traces without enough integration to prevent extinction. And in specific places, direct violence too. Across every other hominin lineage on the planet, the outcome was identical. They disappeared. We remained. There's a comforting version of this story. Simple ecological replacement, no more morally weighted than any species outcompeting another. There's an uncomfortable version, our species' earliest global expansion, defined by displacing, and sometimes destroying, other beings who made tools, cared for their sick, buried their dead, and maybe looked at the same night sky, wondering the same things we do. The evidence supports something messier than either. Thousands of years of coexistence, interbreeding, and competition, ending with exactly one lineage surviving intact. That lineage is reading this right now. Whether to feel implicated in what happened to the Neanderthals and Denisovans is a philosophical question, not a scientific one. Science can tell you what probably happened. It can't tell you how to feel about it. What it can tell you is that a world with only one human species wasn't inevitable, and for most of the last 500,000 years, it wasn't the world that existed. Other kinds of minds existed, other ways of being the kind of creature that builds tools and mourns its dead. Those experiences are gone completely. No amount of genetic analysis will recover what it felt like to be Neanderthal. We carry a small piece of them in our DNA. It's the only monument they have left,